All right, so
Man.
coaches on the hot seat. I would love to get you guys' thoughts. We did this during the football episode last night where we talked about what kind of coaches could be in the hot seat coming up here next season. I do think that there's a little bit more discussion here with the basketball coaches rather than just the football coaches, because I do think there are some basketball coaches, i.e., Kevin Willard, Great Gard, who was the other one I was thinking about, and Ben Johnson a little bit as well. Ben Johnson had a great year, but still, I mean, you look at that record, that's 41 and 54, kind of the same boat with Fred Hoiberg going into last season. He was on everybody's hot seat list. He did have a much better year, so I think there's no way he loses his job next year, but if he has another year similar to what he's had in the past, he could find himself under a lot more pressure and coming in the next season. Larry, are there any coaches you feel like in particular are really on the hot seat going into the season?
An interesting looking at is, oh my goodness, like just the history with that. I know it's over several years, but look, Willard has had a respectable showing in Maryland, but again, now Maryland was a basketball school for as long as I can remember. I know they had some formidable football teams, especially in those early aughts, and mid aughts when they were a thorn in our side when we were good under Shiano's first tenure. But they're a basketball school, and coming from the ACC to the Big Ten, they want basketball success. And now you have a highly touted freshman coming in. Willard was always, kind of an up-and-comer who did some good things at Seton Hall, but was always kind of a wild card. So now you're like, okay, you got the freshman. You have higher expectations. What are you going to actually do to get to the next level? I'm interested to see that. Woodson, respected guy, but now you got a stacked team. And I think there's a difference between hot seat and pressure, and I think pressure and not performing could lead to the hot seat down the road. And when you look at guys like, Pikel's not on the hot seat at all, but you look at guys like Pike, you look at guys like Woodson, and you say, okay, the pressure's on right now. You have teams that are, set up talent-wise to make a dent in the league and in the college basketball world. And if you can't rise to that occasion with that loaded roster, whether it's young, whether it's transfers, whatever, this day and age, no excuses. The pressure's on you to do well, and to meet expectations at least. So I'm interested in that. You look at a guy like McCaffrey, his offenses are always good. I think the Big Ten in general, aside from Purdue last year, has kind of been underwhelming sometimes in the tournament. They are ranked high. They are highly touted. We are used to seeing them in conference, and we know who's good and formidable. But when they get outside the conference, there's been some disappointing results sometimes. So some of these guys, you just wonder with these storied programs how long they'll hang on. But I'm interested in the guys with the stacked rosters, with the high expectations, who are good coaches, but have they hit that benchmark over 60% wins, high 50s, where they're, almost untouchable for a few years. And I'm not so sure if they underperform with really loaded rosters, if they don't move onto that hot seat shortly after the season.
Yeah, no, I think some of those coaches with really good rosters, Mike Woodson is definitely one in there, right? I mean, he has one of the best rosters in the nation, if not the best roster in the Big Ten overall this season. I feel like if Mike Woodson doesn't at least make the NCAA tournament, which is wild to think about, I mean, that should be like the baseline, making the NCAA tournament. But if he doesn't make the NCAA tournament this year, he's gone. Right? I mean, there's no way. I mean, they were talking about firing him last year after he lost McNeely and that kind of stuff. So Mike Woodson, it's kind of like Ryan Day in football, where it's like you have a really good roster. If you don't perform with it, if you don't do the bare minimum, then you're going to be gone. And it's kind of, I don't know, like he doesn't have nearly like as good of a record as Ryan Day does. But at the end of the day, like you said, he's put all this together and the NIL really came through. If he can't do it this year, he's never going to do it. What do you think, Kent?
Look at that school.
Sorry, go ahead, Larry.
No, look at that school. Like I said about Maryland, it's even more concentrated there. I mean, with the history of the basketball program and what they expect to be good at. So I'm with you there.
Yeah. What do you think, Kent?
So I kind of broke down all the coaches in the conference and just to try to figure out who I think is on the hottest of the seats so far. So I'm just going to go through everyone really quickly. These are the guys that are for sure not on the hot seat, and I have different reasons why. There's 4 guys that are in their first year, they're not going to get fired at the end of the year. Musselman, Sprinkle, Diebler, Dusty May. You could say Diebler's in his second year. You could also comment and say, why don't you have his record updated from last year, JR? A lot of people upset about that right now. So
I updated
those 4
it
guys are technically in their
mid Larry talking. I updated it mid Larry talking.
Oh,
so.
did you? Oh, okay, cool. You got it. I didn't even notice that. All right, good job.
We can go back to the other one if you want. There we go. Just kidding.
I'm going to throw Rhodes into that. It's too early still. Like, he's not going to get fired next year because it's only his second year. And, oh, by the way, he had a pretty decent year considering everything that he had coming in and basically restarting with a whole different roster. My second category I'm going to let everybody that's listening decide which one this is. These guys are either too good at coaching or they're just legacy guys at their school. It's Izzo, Painter, Collins, Hoiberg. I have Underwood and Cronin. These guys are all either too good or they're just been there so long they're not going to get fired. I also have, and I know this is now that I'm reading all the comments, I have McCaffrey in that category. I just don't see Iowa getting rid of him ever. I can't see, and it's probably just because for years on end now, it seems like they've had the exact same football coach and the exact same basketball coach. They don't fire anybody. It doesn't matter what happens. They're never going to fire anybody. Like, I just can't see it because I've never seen it happen. So I'm going to put McCaffrey in there as a legacy guy. I will say that that's what he is. And then that leaves 6 guys left that could potentially be on the hot seat. And these 3 guys I think are going to have good seasons next year, so it won't matter. I think Woodson's going to have a good season. I think Dana Altman, which borderline probably should be in the he's too good anyways. And then Peichel, I think all 3 of those teams are going to have good years next year, so they're not getting fired. So it leaves me with the same 3 that you started with, JR, Willard, Ben Johnson, and Greg Gard as guys that could potentially be on the hot seat. I think that Ben Johnson's done enough with the trajectory of his program, and I think that he's going to be decent enough with the roster that he has next year that he won't get fired. So that leaves me with my prediction for next year. I think 2 guys are getting fired. I think it's going to be Greg Gard and Kevin Willard. Those are going to be the 2 guys gone out of the Big Ten.
That was going to be my question, was over under 2.5 coaches getting fired in the Big Ten next year. And I think you're right, Kent, that 2 is probably what we're looking at. I don't think I can see 3. I could see if there's just an absolute disaster for Minnesota, I could see the possibility of them moving on, but I don't think it's likely because I do think former, he was attached. Was he former player or just alumni? I think he was former player at Minnesota. I could be wrong. Don't at me if I'm wrong, but he has earned a little bit more, I think, after this past season that I think people are going to give him another chance. So even if it is an absolute disaster, I think they're going to say, let him have one more year in the transfer portal. But I mean, Larry, I would love to know your thoughts on Greg Gard, because Greg Gard reminds me so much of Chris Holtmann last year, where it's like he has that kind of steady success of getting to the tournament and stuff like that, but he can never do what the fans seem to want him to do. And I just feel like it's going to be the same story as Chris Holtmann last year, where he probably gets off to a good start, things are looking okay, and then he's just going to flop in the middle of the Big Ten at some point, and Wisconsin, either at the end of the year or in the middle of the Big Ten, is just going to say, move on from this guy. The fans hate him. People aren't buying tickets. People aren't coming to games. Everything just looks terrible right now. Greg Gard has no offense. I mean, could you see that same thing happening, Larry, or am I crazy?
No, I think I could see the same thing happening. I like Kent's 2 selections a lot, actually. I mentioned Willard, but Gard is there too. He's in that state where, again, you have a program that has a history where within recent memory they were good. And when you're talking in conference, you have expectations. You're supposed to be formidable. And then you always are kind of, in recent memory, mediocre. And you go through these stretches where you're not winning and you don't meet expectations. And his winning percentage is respectable. It's good. But I think when you have a program that has some expectation and you kind of are ho-hum, being mediocre, I think over time, whether you believe that they're keeping you formidable and respectable or not, you think you got to move on because you need some zest and some spark to get you to the next echelon. And I think Gard is definitely at risk of that. It's funny because talking about Wisconsin these days and even Gard, it seems kind of like an afterthought-ish at the new Big Ten. And that's not what Wisconsin fans want to hear. And that's not their expectation. So I think there's a good chance if they fall into a slump like that mid-season, we could very well see a situation just like that. And it'd be interesting. And I just want to comment on what Ken said about McCaffrey. It's funny, too, because Iowa, like both the football and the basketball team, I know football's been in the West and it's a little different than the East for all these years. That'll change now. But that like low top tier in both programs too, and they keep those coaches, and like I'd take that like in a heartbeat as a Rutgers fan, just like that. The lower end of the top tier every year is pretty good, and they just very mild mannered, very polite. Those guys stay there, and you know what to expect, and it's very acceptable. So I agree on that. I thought that was a good point.
Very mild-mannered and polite as Fran McCaffrey stares down the official.
Well, and as Iowa players are very bad, but, at football, but,
I love it.
My perception of the Hawkeye.
Philip brings up something else I was going to bring up about Gard, but I spaced on it, so thanks for bringing it up. Greg Gard got a contract extension a month or so ago. Chris Holtmann got a contract extension a year before he got fired, too. So that was another thing that I was thinking with, like the similarities there. So yes, you bring up a good point, Philip. Like it wouldn't make much sense for Wisconsin to give him a contract extension and then move on. But at the end of the day, like the contract extension was stupid. The fans hated it. And I think at the end of the day, like this is kind of what similar to the Chris Holtmann thing. So I'm not saying you're wrong, Philip. It very well could, but I'm just looking at these similarities here with Chris Holtmann and Greg Gard, and they're just stacking up too much in my mind.
I'll say like the contract extension thing. I actually commented back that Juwan Howard recently got a contract extension too. So it's like, here's what we'll do. If Greg Gard gets fired this year, after getting a contract extension, I will protest the rest of Wisconsin's games after he gets fired, and I won't watch anymore because I think that's unfair. If he gets a contract extension and then gets fired mid-season, I'm out. Wisconsin. I will not watch another game because I'll be upset. That's not fair to Coach Gard.
But even if they start 0-10 in the Big Ten, like
no, he's
what
gonna.
if they
I think he will get fired. I'm just saying.
Okay.
I just won't watch anymore then.
You know what I think too with these contract extensions? You make a good point. I almost think they get these extensions. Not always, not when it's like well in advance and there's no question. Sometimes these extensions come because there's a lot of doubt. There's negative recruiting around the program. You give him the extension to try to, justify, oh, he's going to be here. Now he could sell recruits on coming in. And you give him some insurance for when he gets fired. He has some walking away money. He's probably going to get employed by somebody else. So you're not really on the hook for all of it. I don't think the extensions necessarily mean everything. And I think the context means something. They go on some great winning streak, have a great season, they get an extension. Different than, they're wavering and there's a lot of negative recruiting, they get an extension. Just saying.
That's true. I think, and if you think about it, like recruiting does help certain coaches. Like, I mean, Larry, you be completely honest with me. If Steve Peichel lost Cliff Amoria and did not bring in Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, I don't think you would feel as great about him, and you'd possibly be talking about, I'm not saying hot seat, but you would be talking about more pressure on Steve Peichel this year than you would be right now, correct?
Well, I think it might even be close to hot seat, not because I don't love Steve Peichel, not because I don't respect and absolutely feel grateful for everything he's done to this program, but because you have to be forward looking, and past success doesn't guarantee future success. The basketball landscape has changed. So had he lost one of these freshmen, I think it would seriously call into question his ability to navigate the world going forward. And that's why he's not on the hot seat, but we're watching. Like there's a lot of pressure, and I loved how with the category Ken put him in too, and he put Woods in there, which I believe both of them are in, which is they could be, but I think they're going to have a good season. So no, agreed. I think they're both going to have a good season. But the fact that they're even in that category shows you the pressure. If they don't have a good season, that's a big issue for both those guys.
Yeah, for sure. Russ talking about the contract extensions more. He says contracts mean nothing. Indiana basketball school negotiated a $20 million buyout for their football coach. Contracts mean nothing, next to nothing when it comes down to job security. And then he talks about how they negotiated it down from $15.5 million to $5 million. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like all it takes is one donor, right? All it takes is for the athletic director to go into one meeting and be like, oh, guys, well, we can't fire the head basketball coach. Look at what his buyout is. And the donor just like, how much? Right? Like, or two donors to get together and just be like, how much? Because this guy sucks. Get rid of him right now.
That's why Matt Painter's been at Purdue for so long, because Russ has been going to those meetings and saying, we just can't get rid of this guy. Even after the early exits, those few years, like one meeting with Russ, and it was like, no, he's staying. Like, that's the only reason why he's still there. I mean, they were coming for his head, and Russ put an end to that real quick with that donor meeting. So
there you go. Russ single-handedly saving Matt Painter, or Matt Painter saving
Purdue
himself
basketball.
Yeah. So, yeah, he's just bringing in multiple 7-footers and going from there. So, there you go. Spitfire kid.
Love it.
All right.